It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. In various parts of the world, we're seeing geopolitical and military conflict, as well as uncertainty, with worrying signs of escalation, particularly as new security threats emerge. And global cooperation is sorely needed at this point to build dialogue for peace. And today we invite an expert who has been at the forefront of such efforts. Dan Smith is a British author and peace researcher who has been the director of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute since 2015. Dan Smith has been a leading voice on global peace and security, not only when it comes to interstate conflicts, but also climate change, gender issues and food security. As for the Korean Peninsula, his organisation has worked with the Swedish government to organise a working-level meeting between the two Koreas and the United States in January 2019. And last year, he was awarded the Jeju April Third Peace Prize here in the country for his efforts to restore dialogue and denuclearisation and peace on the Korean Peninsula. Very warm welcome to you, Director Smith. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Well, this year, actually, you're in Seoul to participate in the World Emerging Security Forum 2022, being organised by the Korean government. And, well, as a key participant there, what are you really hoping to see? What kind of discussions are you hoping to see come out of this?
Well, I think this forum is a really important initiative, both because it brings Northeast Asia into the forefront of the security discussions, and because it focuses onto the new areas like cyber technology, the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning in both defensive and potentially offensive weapon systems. It looks at outer space and so on. I think the big focus right now is to think about cybersecurity and the problems which arise there, both in daily life, but for intergovernmental relations as well.
I see, and in recent years, the world has been through many different kind of challenges, as we all know. And well, how has the concept of security really evolved since then? And what kind of role do you see South Korea playing in order to contribute to these, countering these growing challenges?
Well, I think, we've always thought about security in terms of armed forces and state to state. And then we had to obviously broaden the horizon from that to start thinking about intra-state warfare, civil wars, because most armed conflicts since the Second World War have been within states rather than between them. But I think now we've found we need to broaden the understanding even further, because the reasons why armed conflicts arise are not just to do with political ambition, rivalry, lust for power, and all of that, which we've seen throughout history, but also because of the impact of climate change, the environmental crisis, food insecurity and so on, which destabilize societies, lead to instability. So we've got a much broader concept of security. And then within that, we're seeing new instruments. I mean, it's not just kinetic weapons, but the weapons which use force, but it's also cyber weapons. And then, of course, there's also the use of information warfare. So in many dimensions, the concept of security and what we do in order to ensure it has been expanding in recent years.
Right, and South Korea has been aiming to expand its role in dialogue, really, international dialogue, in order to contribute more to the world, particularly under this Yoon administration. And, well, what role do you see it playing in these security talks?
Well, first of all, I think that it's part of the evolution of South Korea since democratization, that it has understood. I mean, I think governments of both parties have increasingly understood that South Korea needs to play a role which is not just about the Korean Peninsula, not just about Northeast Asia, but also about global security as a whole. So South Korea has a role to play in the United Nations, in regional fora, in the Indo-Pacific. And I think it's that bigger screen that it's working on, bigger canvas that it needs to paint on, which I see the World Emerging Security Forum as being a part of.
Right, and certainly at the forum you'll be, I'm sure, discussing about how the concept of security has been expanding to these non-traditional areas of security. And well, in terms of traditional threats, though, we heard some worrying reports from your institute, actually, that despite some progress that we saw last year in terms of dialogue in nuclear arms control, countries are actually increasing their stockpiles of nuclear arms. And does this mean that, well, do you think nuclear deterrence is going to work, or do you think the increasing number of arms indicates that these dialogues and these treaties or global institutions that they're actually failing?
Well, I think two parts to the answer to that. The first thing is that there are 9 states that own nuclear weapons now, and all of them are in one sense or another modernizing and enhancing, improving their nuclear arsenals. So there has been a long-term fall in the number of nuclear warheads worldwide, and this has been a major achievement and cause for great optimism for several decades. From the mid-1980s, when there were about 70,000 nuclear warheads worldwide, there's now about 12,700, according to our latest data. That is enough to effectively destroy life as we know it, but it's still a major reduction compared to what it was during the Cold War. But we see that process now as essentially coming to an end. We see the decline beginning to bottom out, and we see the number of operationally deployed nuclear warheads, the ones which are actually on the bombers and the missiles, beginning to increase. So that's worrying. And something needs to be done about that. And when the geopolitical atmosphere is as toxic as it is at the moment, and when basically Western diplomats and Russian diplomats are not talking to each other, then it's hard to see what the way forward will be to achieve the next steps of arms control and arms reduction. But the other thing, I think, is that it's always not probable that there will be a nuclear war. It would be a stupid thing to do. All 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council agreed in a public statement made in January of this year. They echoed what Reagan and Gorbachev said in 1985. Nuclear war can never be won, and therefore it must never be fought. But at the same time, when you have this toxic, tense, hostile atmosphere, then I think the risk of miscommunication and accident, so war not happening on purpose, but kind of stumbling blindly, accidentally into war, that seems to me to be the major risk.
It is very concerning because we're hearing very thinly disguised threats about the possibility of a nuclear attack.
Well, I think not even really thinly disguised.
Exactly.
I mean, I think Russia's president and spokespeople have come straight out and said that they would do it because they know that it's a threat to wave in the faces of everybody that could constrain other states' behavior. But I still think, even so, that the deliberate launching of nuclear war is improbable. What I worry about is that those kinds of statements heat up the atmosphere, and then people maybe in crisis don't think straight. If they see what they think looks like a nuclear attack, maybe they react too fast.
Exactly, and the way they communicate this, the messaging is very important. And well, NATO, they're gathering in Spain at the end of the month, and they'll be launching their new strategic concept. And well, we're seeing they'll be inviting countries from the Indo-Pacific, including South Korea, of course. And well, do you see the two kind of US traditional alliances coming together? How do you think they will really approach this new strategic concept?
I think on the surface they're coming together, but I think that underneath the surface there's still bubbling along a lot of uncertainty, some fractiousness between members of the NATO alliance in any case. And I think, of course, we know that there are issues in Northeast Asia which continues to divide the USA's traditional allies here. I think on the other side of the divide, between the Russia, China, North Korea, other potential allies, there's also a lot of fractiousness. So I don't think that there are these two really solid blocks. But what I hope happens when NATO gets together in Madrid at the end of the month, as you said, is that somebody is standing up and saying, look, we cannot go on with just kind of freezing out the Russians and trying to pretend that Russia is not there and not part of the international setup. It's a permanent member of the UN Security Council. It can veto anything. There's a review conference of the Non-Proliferation Treaty coming up in August. If Western diplomats and Russian diplomats won't talk to each other, then I think it's going to be a disaster. So we really need somebody, and it could be South Korea, but I hope it will be others as well, standing forward and saying, look, we need some good old-fashioned diplomacy, quiet communication, because we need to handle a very dangerous situation as seriously and in as responsible and adult a way as we can manage.
Right, and of course, as you mentioned, President Yoon Suk-yeol, the South Korean president, will be in the room when that NATO summit happens. And how do you see South Korea really contributing to that summit, especially when it comes to areas like cybersecurity?
Well, I think, first of all, I think South Korea will probably in part be in a listening mode. I think it will also be in networking mode. But I think South Korea has a lot to offer in terms of the knowledge, the technical knowledge about these emerging security threats, challenges, and instruments that we have. So I think that there will possibly be a degree of cooperation in the cyberspace between NATO's Centre of Excellence in Estonia and the new centre which are emerging in Northeast Asia. And then on top of that, as I say, I really just hope that South Korea and other participants from outside of the NATO alliance will be encouraging NATO to understand that there must be diplomatic contact. There must be dialogue. These issues are too big to be taking up, kind of taking poses and postures about. You've got to get down to some serious work.
And of course, security dialogue really starts at home for South Korea because of the chronic threat that we face from North Korea. And well, how do you assess the nuclear capability of the North Korean regime right now? And with its continued provocations that we've seen throughout this year, just dozens of them, how far do you think it will go, I suppose?
Well, we think that North Korea has got enough weapons material for more than 40 nuclear warheads, but we think it has only constructed 20. And that's based on what we can understand about its nuclear industry, its nuclear technology, how much material it has, and so on. Now, seen from a North Korean point of view, the preeminent military superpower in the world, the USA, is clearly its adversary. And it has argued, therefore, that it needs the nuclear deterrent, just as other states have nuclear deterrent. Seen from a South Korean, a Japanese, US, or indeed a global point of view, it looks very different. And this is so often the case that what one side justifies in terms of security, the other side understands in terms of power. What one side sees as defensive, the other side sees as maybe being aggressive. So the Korean Peninsula has become a kind of a fundamental area of military confrontation in the way that Germany was during the Cold War. And that situation needs to be handled with a great deal of care. I think we should try to get back as soon as it's possible to be discussing again with North Korea as they come out of the COVID pandemic. We need to be discussing confidence and security building measures again. We need just to be talking and to be finding out more about concerns. We need to be cooling things as much as we can rather than heating them.
I see, and well, you've helped facilitate dialogue between the two Koreas and the US as well back in 2019, and 2019, and there have been a series of talks really over the past 3 decades, and many attempts, many different approaches by the US and South Korean administrations, but all of these have not led to denuclearization or any tangible progress. So what do you think now is really the way forward in engaging the regime, which doesn't seem to be interested at all in talking?
Well, I think that the regime is interested in talking, but it's interested in talking on its terms. And it needs to learn that a conversation happens on terms which are mutually agreeable about topics which are mutually important. But that means that there must be, in a sense, pre-talks. And I think that's where sort of we come in, that we can listen, we can interpret, we can understand, we can try to help find that common ground, which is not in the first place a common ground of agreement. It's just a common ground of settling on what it is that you actually want to talk about. It's kind of agreeing the agenda rather than the outcome. And we were making progress towards that in 2018 and 2019. And since then, as you said, it's slipped very much away. And I think that that's contributed to the general feeling of danger and insecurity in the world. There is no magic formula. There is no wand to wave to bring things back together again. It's just hard work and being ready. And we've certainly signalled to the North Korean regime that as soon as it is willing to, and finds it possible, we want to be back in the kind of contact with them that we were before, because we think that that performs a service for everybody's benefit.
And well, during your week here in Seoul, you're going to be speaking about the environment of peace at the World Emerging Security Forum here in Seoul. And well, how does a green transition really promote or foster peace?
Well, I think there's a number of different ways in which climate change and the broader environmental crisis feed conflict and insecurity. And conflict and insecurity feed environmental deterioration and the problems of climate change. And we don't have time to go into those. There's an 85-page report, which we refer to as the short report, right, which sets that out. Now, basically what we can conclude from that, sort of environment and peace are so closely interlinked that if you damage one, you damage the other. But the great thing is that they're so closely interlinked that if you enhance one, you enhance the other. So positive work for peace equals positive work for the environment. And there's a number of different things that can be done. We need to learn how to have better foresight. We need to be adapting to the impact of climate change as it unfolds. And then we need to make this transition, the green transition, so that we decarbonize our economies. But what we have to understand, and our research has also unearthed this, is that there are several risks in that transition. There will be losers as well as winners. It's going to be a huge economic transformation. We must make that transition, but we must make it carefully. So what we talk about is the importance of a just and peaceful green transition.
Right, so peace and environment really goes hand in hand. It's
Absolutely,
a symbiotic relationship, and something that's not emphasised enough. So we look forward to hearing more about that at the forum. Well, thank you so much today for your time, Director Dan Smith.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks.